Hello and welcome to this short talk on the simulation argument and the simulation hypothesis, most famously associated with Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom. And I'm providing this not so much to review and explain the simulation argument, because I believe that Bostrom's article and the interview that he conducted that I posted in the module are fairly transparent, really, but more to contextualize it broadly, bring Elon Musk into the picture, and also to give an opportunity for some not necessarily protests, but or even strong objections, but just other ways of thinking about the simulation hypothesis that make it less than certain, less than the degree of certainty that Bostrom and others suggest. I'm going to begin in an unusual spot, and the interview that I take this from is down in the treasure chest at the bottom of the module page. But this is what Philip K. Dick said at a talk that he gave in France in 1977. By way of starting the talk, he said the subject of the speech is a topic which has been discovered recently and which may not exist at all. I may be talking about something that does not exist, he says. Therefore, I'm free to say anything and nothing. I, in my stories and novels, sometimes write about counterfeit worlds, semi-real worlds as well as deranged private worlds, inhabited often by just one person. At no time did I have a theoretical or conscious explanation for my preoccupation with these plural form pseudo-worlds, but now I think I understand. What I was sensing was the manifold of partially actualized realities lying tangent to what evidently is the most actualized one, the one that the majority of us by consensus gentium agree on. Later in the talk, he concludes we are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. Well, we will have more to say about this when we get to the world Jones makes, the world Jones made at the end of the course. But it is interesting that at the time when almost nobody had seen a desktop portable desktop personal computer, that Philip Dick was thinking in this direction. As for counterfeit worlds, we have a very good example of it in the alternative police department in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, but that's not exactly a computer-generated example. In the Philosophical Quarterly, Nick Bostrom published a short article, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? He was born in 1973. He is Swedish. He was educated at Oxford University. He is still involved with the Future of Humanities Institute in Oxford. Now considered one of the most influential philosophers discussing transhumanism. He originally presented his argument in 2001 and published it in 2003. And he really is, in my estimation, one of the more intriguing thinkers of our time. And he's using a lot of energy on ethical dimensions for AI. How can we ethically treat an AI being? And ethical dimensions of AI. How should we arrange AI so that it treats us rightly and fairly? To get into the simulation argument, you have to understand what an ancestor simulation is and why one would create them. An ancestral simulation is a high-quality computer simulation of life that we believed as it was lived in our past. That would be indistinguishable from reality to the simulated ancestor, meaning that an algorithm functioning as a person within the simulation would assume that it was true. This simulated agent within a simulated environment I locate in Zone 4 of the encoded uncanny from last week's article. And we have an encoded agent within an encoded environment. Ancestor simulations can be created for entertainment, as we do with literature and video games. But they also can be used to recreate history and model a social reality, which I will come to at the end of this brief talk. So if you really could immerse yourself within a game like The Sims, you'd get an idea of what this being an ancestor and an crude ancestor simulation would be like. We've been doing some work with the post-human, and basically we're talking about genetic, biological intervention to make people more healthy and create people with cognitive powers that are greater than our own. So a person who exists beyond human, and it is strongly implied in Harari's works that this is a desired end state for Homo sapiens. So Bostrom's argument in 3 points. He argues that at least one of the following propositions is true. Either human species is very likely to go extinct due to self-replicating robots or global warming before reaching a post-human stage where we would simulate our ancestors in ancestor simulations. As Elon Musk puts it, if civilization stops advancing, that may be due to some event that erases civilization. Or 2, any post-human civilization is unlikely to run a significant number of ancestor simulations of their own evolutionary history. They may make this choice because they have other things to do, or it is viewed as unethical because the simulated reality would, the person in the simulated reality would feel real to the simulated people, and there's already enough suffering in the world. Why create more simulated suffering? But if we don't go extinct before we can do it, and we decide not to do it because, or we don't decide not to do it because of ethical reasons, then we are most certainly living in a computer simulation right now. And Bostrom's argument is based upon probabilities here. So it follows that the belief that there is a significant chance that we will one day create ancestor simulations is likely false unless we are currently living in a computer simulation. So the base reality would make one simulation, a basement simulation, and then further simulations are nested in successive layers. The Rick and Morty cartoon where he goes into his battery is a simulation within a simulation within a simulation, as was the one where the Zagurians created several layers of simulation to fool Rick into giving his recipe for concentrated dark matter, I think it was called. So, broadly speaking, this hypothesis, this argument, rather, is predicated upon the conviction that there will be an enormous amount of computer power available in the future. Looks like that's still happening. So we can imagine that if the prediction is correct, we can run highly detailed simulations of our ancestors, and very many of them, and that the simulations would themselves be conscious, not the simulation algorithm, but agents within the simulation. The vast majority of minds like ours do not belong to the original race, therefore, but rather to simulations of the original race. Most people who are conscious today would not be real people, but simulations, therefore. It is possible then to argue that we are among those simulated minds rather than the original biological ones. So, if we don't think that we're currently living in a computer simulation, we're not entitled to believe that we will have descendants who will run such simulations of their ancestors. And spoiler alert, we are already running very modest versions of these simulations now called with multi-agent artificial intelligence embedded in them. There is a notion of can we create an algorithm that will be conscious, that has consciousness? Well, with the right sort of computer structure and processes that can be associated with conscious experiences, yeah, we could do that. We could create a computer large enough to imitate how we believe the brain operates. Also, being conscious is not necessarily limited to carbon-based biological neural network inside the brain. Silicon-based processors inside the computer could, in principle, do the trick, and they might even be better at it than we are. And Bostrom is actually more committed to this idea of substrate independence now than he was in 2003. So artificial consciousness can be a thing. At this stage, we have neither sufficiently powerful hardware nor software to create conscious minds, but if the technological progress continues unabated, then these shortcomings will eventually be overcome. We can create conscious simulated insects, I would imagine. As a matter of fact, I believe Harari makes that point. So we're getting there. And we are actively working to embody AI, which is a major step in this direction. So to Bostrom, post-human civilizations would have enough computing power to perform ancestor simulations. Such a mature stage of technological development will make it possible to convert planets and other astronomical resources into computers. But would we even have to if we could just simulate them to begin with? I don't know. A simulation of the entire universe down to the quantum level is at this moment not feasible, unless new physics is discovered. But to create a realistic simulation of human experience, much less is needed than getting down to very, very, very micro pixelation of the universe. A creator would simulate all humans and their environment so the simulations don't notice any irregularities, and parts that are not viewed could certainly be left out, like the center of the Earth is only discoverable once we dig down to it, because there's no need to make a simulation of it. It is kind of interesting that there are some theories of physics that point out that some phenomena do not exist until we actually observe them. That would certainly rhyme with this idea here. And if you become aware of a simulation, fine, they can just spool it back, change our brains, and then we can forget that we realized we were in a simulation. Okay. Elon Musk is on record as thinking that this is a pretty cool theory. As a matter of fact, it's for him it's a very optimistic theory because it means that we survived as a species far enough to actually achieve these ends. So he says it's almost certain that we're in a simulation. He thinks there's a 1 in billions chance that this is the base reality that we're in right now. And humans are basically tottering around in some advanced version of The Sims. Well, why not? 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, we had Pong, which was just table tennis on a black and white screen. And now we have all kinds of games, God games of various kinds, SimCity, The Sims, right? So now we even have 3D simulations to get more realistic every year. So 10,000 years into the future, what might the options be? If we keep advancing and assuming that everything in the physical world can be simulated, eventually we will simulate ourselves. Remember, the unstated purpose, one of the unstated purposes of robotics is to create human beings indistinguishable from real human beings. Why would we not want to do that within software? In this scenario, there are billions of universes that are indistinguishable from our own. That means chances are we are living in one of the simulated universes, and given the other possibilities that human civilization has an inevitable ceiling, Musk thinks that we really better hope that we are in a simulation, because if we're not in a simulation, then there's a very good chance we're not going to survive. Um, there are some nice aspects to the argument as well. It suggests naturalistic analogies for God to traditional religious concepts. And if we're living in a simulation, then there is a higher level being, but it's really some version of us. And, God did create man in his own image. So there is that. So one of three possibilities is true. Either all technologically advanced civilizations self-destruct before they can create a seamless ancestor simulation, or these advanced technological civilizations lose interest or deliberately decide not to create ancestor simulations, or you are living in a computer simulation. Your consciousness is a program not based on a carbon life form. You are a process. You are an algorithm. Um, there are some problems with this idea, and I presented this at a symposium in 2017, and basically it's just two observations. I'll begin with a weak one. And that is, first, it must be noted that a society will generally adopt a prevalent technique or technology as a model to answer the big questions about life, the universe, and everything. In medieval times, religion was the controlling technique of social organization, and God was the creator and judge of the world. With Newton and the advent of mechanical time, the universe was a clockwork. After the atomic bomb exploded, we were all created in a big bang. It comes as no surprise then, with computers in our pockets and on our desktops and in our parlors, that an algorithm in a computer has come to displace and answer for these other models of life, the universe, and everything. So in other words, it's time. It's time for this model. But let's take this apart another way and talk about what an ancestor simulation is. And it has content, it has form, it occurs in time. So it is essentially an act of communication. It is a transference of a signal from from instruction to algorithm. So an ancestor simulation of a civilization running on a sufficiently advanced computer is composed of several acts of communications. And if it's a nested simulation, this gets more complex all the time. Communication is subject to signal destructive entropy. We know this from the works of Norbert Wiener. Therefore, nested simulations within simulations, would be physically unsustainable. So then if we're not living in a civilization, then either we've destroyed ourselves before we get to the level of doing it, or we get bored with it. But Bostrom also allows for serial catastrophes to continually reset the technological civilization to zero, thereby preventing the technological advance without requiring extinction. But this really counts as situation one, I would think. Further, an alternative to number two is that posthumans are not ethically motivated so much as that they attain a certain degree of interaction with their computers that they just keep pressing the dopamine centers, and they lose curiosity to run ancestor simulations. So, Bostrom's modern iteration of an ancestor simulation. I think you're going to recognize the names at the end of this. The probability of our living in a computer simulation increases if we successfully create seamless ancestor simulations. So if we build one, it means that we're probably in one. And there is a research group at the University of Agder that has a project that does deal with ancestor simulations. They have agent-based models where there are independent agents, algorithms running around in the model, and the human, via virtual reality goggles, can plug herself into the simulation and interact. These agents have a lot of personality variables. I think like maybe 30 to 50 sliders to create each unique agent: age, gender, embodiment factors, fat, thin, personality biases, prejudices. And within the simulation, the agents age, they learn, they develop, and they do change over time. And one of these was by two of your, at least if you're in the Technologie Menneskelige Samfunnsstudiet, two of your professors for next semester, Hanne Holland and Hege Wallevik, have been working with modeling Lesbos, creating a contemporary ancestor simulation of a refugee camp on the island of Lesbos.